Conference, your source for JVM knowledge.
Okay, I think we can start, right? How many people like love stories? Oh, not so much. But let's hope you like this story. Okay, I'm going to tell you the best love story in the whole technology ecosystem. Maybe not better than the Steve Jobs, the Steve Wozniak love story, but kind of. Just to start, we are going to move to Los Angeles, at that city that never sleeps, and we are going there to find Jacqueline Stone. Jacqueline Stone, she came from a very high lineage where she studied from the best solid universities, and she learned a lot from the brother of her mother, that he is called Bob, and she always called him Uncle Bob, right? And okay, sorry. And she is engaged with Mr. Ford, Mr. Harrison Ford. You know, this is not a very love story because they didn't love each other. They just wanted to marry, just to merge the two families and create a new family that is going to be the reference for every object-oriented programmer. Now we are presenting, so I'm going to present myself too. I'm Nicolás Patarino. I'm from Argentina, the country that says Maradona, Messi, and tango. Yes, first of all, I'm going to apologize because this is my first English talk. So if you don't understand anything, just ask me. Or if you are very shy to ask me, just cough 3 times. And I'm going to do what every non-native speaker says, is repeat the same but slower, you know. Okay, I'm working on 20. If you want to work in a very nice place, go to 20 to work with us. Okay, let's move again to the clean architecture. How many of you know clean architecture? Okay, nice, it's perfect. Because I'm not going to be very deep with explanation about clean architecture. Maybe this is the most typical way to explain clean architecture, right? The circles inside of circles. For me, the most important thing is the arrow direction that is point inwards, because the inner circles shouldn't know anything about the outer circles, okay? But this is the only thing that I'm going to tell you right now. Why we use clean architecture? Because it makes us be independent of the frameworks and libraries, independent of the database, independent of the UI, domain center, and for me the most important thing that it makes the architecture, the application testable, right? Okay, let's back to clean architecture family. And she's Jacqueline Stone. She was walking on the street, and suddenly she says, "Oh, maybe it's him. Who could be?" He heard that there is some guy here in the city, and yes, it was him. It was Ryan Kotlin, right? And he was working, and she got close to him and started to watch what he was doing. And he was working with lists. And she said, "Oh, mama, what a beauty. So how elegant it is." So she started to think about JAVSON4 and say, okay, how do you do the same with JAVSON4? And this is the normal thing that you do, no? Right? Is create a temporary variable, a for loop, and just get the elements and put it in the, add it to a new list, right? But with Ryan Kotlin, it was pretty easy. And she started to be in love with him, you know? It's like butterflies in the stomach. And he continued and say, okay, I can also add more things to this function, just adding a few lines. And she was, wow, this never happened with JAVSON4. And she came back to her home, and was JAVSON asking her where you have been, with whom, what did you do? And they started to argue, and she ran out crying, and go with Ryan Kotlin and tell him, okay, with Javison 4 I have a lot of problems because I have to do a lot of work with him. For example, if I want to create a class, a data class, I need to create all the variables and the constructor, and I'm not putting it here, but also they have to create the setters and getters. But if you are working with and also if you want to compare that data class, you need to override the equals method, the hashcode method, and if you want to print it, you have to write the toString method. And this is a lot of work. And Ryan Kotlin was very snooty, and he said, okay, you say data class, right? Yes, I say data class, she says. So in Kotlin, we only need to add the word data before the class. So that's enough. And say, oh, mama, word beauty again. Also, I have some problems with mutability. She says, for example, in this case, we have a movie manager, we have a new movie, and we are setting the year, 2019. So after that, we are calling do something method with the movie, and we are going to print the year. So how many of you think that it's going to print 2019? No one knows. Why? Because this is a setter. This is a setter. And, oh, it's too big, I think. Okay, this is a setter. And inside the do something method, we can change again the setter. And we are never sure, we cannot be sure that always is 2019, right? What we can do with Javison 4? Okay, we can remove the setter method, and we can create a with year new method. That is not going to change that value, that property of the movie, but it's going to create a new class, a new instance of movie. And with that, we can be absolutely sure that do something cannot change the year. So when we are going to print the get year, it's going to return 2019. Nice. But how Kotlin does it? Just change it var to val. That makes that the properties are not mutable, are immutable. And they were absolutely loved. Jacqueline and Javison 4, they have broken, and they started a new life with Ryan Kotlin. But Jacqueline has a lot of problems with Javison. They also have layer problems. For example, when you have in clean architecture different layers, you need to transform the objects between that layers, right? This could be a very simple mapper that takes one movie entity and transform it to movie. Okay. How we can use it? In this case, we have something like a repository that uses two data sources, one local data source and another network data source. Okay, take the movie from the local data source. If the movie isn't null, it mapper and return it. If it is null, it gets the movie from the network data source. And again, if different of null, return it, the mapping, transformation. I think it's something normal, that's something that we could use it. But before to explain how we could do it in Kotlin, we are going to talk about extension functions. How many of you knows extension functions? Okay, maybe most of you. So extension function is going to be very fast. It's just adding a function to a class, right? In this case, we have a method, upper class first letter, that receives a string and make the uppercase, right? So if we want to create a extension function, we are going to add the string before to the method. With that, we are just saying that we are going to add that method to the class. Okay, in this case, we can use it Maradona.uppercase first letter, right? But this is something that is not very common to know, but it also helps us not only to add a method, it also could change the order on the invocations. For example, If we use it in the normal way, we are going to say, okay, uppercase first letter, Maradona. But if we use extension function, we can say Maradona dot uppercase first letter. And in later, we are going to see that it could be helpful for us, okay? So what we have done, there we can make a movie entity to domain. This is an extension function that create a method to map, to transform the movie entity into the movie, right? In this case, if we try to replicate what we have done before in the repository, it looks a little bit easier, right? It's local data source dot get movie dot recover. If recover is another extension function that I created that is going to be called only when there is null in get movie by ID. It tries to get it from the network source, and after that, transform the entity to domain. Okay, I think it could be a little bit easier. Okay, it improved us the readability. We have before that, and I think it's a little bit better in that way. And I don't know if you know it, but here we can put it operator. Operator is a reserved word keyword to change. Okay, here to change the get. Here in Kotlin there are some methods that could be overload the operator. So if you overload the operator get with the method to get, you can access to that method with .get, as always we do, or we can access like an array way, you know. But this is not the only method that we can overload. We can also overload plus, minus, times, get, set, invoke, and so on, right? It could be helpful sometimes, right? Now they were very in love. They meant to be all their life together. And he said, okay, also you can do that kind of things, you know? Or maybe better, we can make an interop with Java and we can do something like this. And she says, oh, fuck. This is exactly the same that I have it with JSON 4. So I wanted to change, I wanted to improve myself, my life, but I'm getting exactly the same, right? And JSON 4 says, build time increase it with Kotlin. So she was completely fucked. So she was out of love with Ryan Kotlin. But Ryan Kotlin, it's a kind functional. So we have to understand. I think he is ahead of his time. He is better than everything that he does is for a greater good for all. So we need to understand first why sometimes he is a little bit functional. And to understand why he is a little bit functional, we are going to talk about functional programming. Just a little bit, and just is not something very specific. But for example, we are going to make everything by example, right? So we have one work to do, and it's calculate the total cost of a list of tasks. We have a list of tasks. Any task has a time that has to be done, and any time that has a price, and we can calculate that, right? The total cost. So what we have to do? First, we need to get list, a task entity list. We have to transform it to a task list. We need to get time for each task. We calculate the cost for each time and sum all the costs, right? It's not something complicated. So we are going to just put it in a functional way. First in Java, this is something that we can do. I think it's not so bad. It could be improved, but I don't think it's very bad. First, we create some temporary variable. We create a for loop just for all the list of task entities. We take the first one, and to map it to domain, get the time spent, calculate the price, and sum it to the temporary variable, right? When we get out from the for, we are going to have all the sum cost, right? This is how we do it in Java. If we wanted to make the translation in functional programming, we need to know what reduce is. Reduce is a method that you can receive a list of something, a function, and it returns a value. For example, it could be helpful for us now when we have a list of int, no, or euros that is going to have all the costs, and it returns only one. The function in this case is going to sum, no, right? It will take every item. I'm going to sum with the next one, right? Also, we have the map method that it takes a list and also a function, and it's going to return the same list with the function applied for every item. For example, it's going to transform some data. And the sum method, that is something that I told you before, that it takes 2 int, for example, and return an int, or 2 euros and return an euros. It's something simple. So if we put it in a functional way, we can have something like this, right? And she say, okay, you are not getting better. I say, really? You are not getting any better. And he say, okay, let's start just for step by step, right? So first, we are going to start from the deeper part, and we take a map. We have a list, and we have a function. But maybe this is not so readable, so we are going to rename it, right? Instead of call it map with a function to domain, we can create a function that is called list to domain, right? I think it's a little bit better. And we can do exactly the same with the next step. The next step, okay, we can put it in one line because it's better, always, right? If you have the possibility to put in one line, why not put everything in one line? No, that's not true. Okay, so the next step, we have a map and we have a step spend time method. So also we can rename it to create it as one method, list spend time. And we are going to put it in some line? Yeah. No, we didn't put it. Okay, but now we have a map with a spend time in euros. We can also put it in one method. And the reduce with the sum, we can do exactly the same. We can create a method called sum all. And this returning, this is the final calling chain. I think it could be easier to understand than the first part. If we put it in one line, okay, maybe we can follow it. Maybe it's not so readable, but we can follow it. But if we remember, when we were talking about extension functions, I also told that it's not only to create to add a function to one class, it also could change the order of invocation, right? So what we are going to do is create an extension function for each function. For example, in the first option, we have task entity list. So we are going to create a list to domain method. That is going to return list task, okay? And we are going to make the same for the second step, that we have a list of tasks, and we are going to map it to list spend time without extension function. And we do the same for list time in euros and sum all. What we obtain, what we gain with this, is that we can call in a more semantic way, right? It's like task entity dot list to domain dot list spend time dot list time in euros dot sum all. So this process is something that maybe we are used to, but maybe we don't know where it comes from. I think if we just remember that it came from functional programming, maybe it's better to not be so afraid with that. Okay. The full cost method that we have in Java, it could go, okay. This is what we have in Java, and I think it's better this way. I think it's more readable. Sometimes we think that this is more readable, but to me it's not that we are more, it's more readable, but is that we are more familiar with that. Sometimes we mistake that. Okay, now she is getting a little bit better with Ryan Kotlin. They started to be in love again. So how did you error handling with Hibernation 4? For example, we can create an interface repository with a method getMovie. Okay, here we have a use case that with a run method that is going to try catch the repository getMovie, because we don't know if that method, the repository, could throw or not an exception, right? We are just capturing the exception as exception, so it's not so good. But we can improve it, right? We can make explicit the exception that it could throw, and we can catch it independently, okay? But also we can go further, and we can create our own exceptions. So if we can create our own exception, network exception, and not movie exception, okay, it's getting better because I know in a more specific way what we are having, what is happening, right? So we are going to see how we can do the same in Kotlin. But first, exceptions, to me, is not the best way to work with errors, to handle errors, because they are very expensive. They are very expensive because when we are throwing an exception, it takes, and it has to go through all the stack trace and copy the stack trace for that new exception. There is one way that you can skip it. If you, I think when you create an exception, you can pass it 3 parameters, and the last 2 are booleans that you can play with him to avoid to copy all the stack trace. But when it throws, you are not be able to see where it was, right? Also, to me, it's bad modeling, because if we have the exception that I think most of us will have, not item exception, we are telling that this is an exception that we cannot have an item. But to me, this is something that will happen. If I have a repository and I say, okay, give me the 2 elements, maybe there is no element, and it's normal that happens. So to me, it's a bad modeling, because it will be exceptional, as exception says. And also, it could let the system inconsistent. Because, why? For example, if you have a list, you are list of user, and you are just writing down in the database, in the position 10, it makes an exception. You have writing some users in the database, but you don't know if it was 1, 2, 3, or 20. The only thing that you can do is just make transactions and try to avoid that problem, not because of the problem, just because to not let it inconsistent, just because we are using exceptions. And we have unchecked exceptions, that this is exceptions that you are not telling in the signature of the method that it could throw. So if you are using a library, you never know if that library could throw or not an exception. And it could be very, very complicated, because we cannot put try catch for every single call. So I think that's a problem. How we can do it in Kotlin? I think we know what an enum in Java is. It's something like this, no? We can create errors there, or even we can go a little bit further and we can create a more specific enum just to get some information, right? In Kotlin, we have something similar that is called sealed class, and it's like a restricted hierarchy. That I think, how many of you knows either object? Okay, so I'm going to explain it now. Okay, we can say that sealed class is an enum with vitamins, right? Because you can create several instances per class. They can carry a state. For example, here, this is an example of sealed class. We can have, in a restricted hierarchy, not found, network error, or file system error. Everyone could have a different values, different properties, and different params. So that's very, very nice, because there are different errors. And she say, okay, we need to talk, because it's going to get in a little bit harder, this. We are going to talk about either. The either is something that Jorge explained in the previous talk. And you can have 2 values. You can have the left values or the right value. In some languages, it's called result. In Swift, for example, or in other libraries. It could be used to communicate error and success. The left, it should be, well, used to be the error and the right, the success. It's similar to option. Option is like an either. In one side, it could have nothing, or the success, right? Or even the try. Try is exactly the same than either, but in the left part, we always have an exception. So for example, this is how we can code in Kotlin and either. Just put it not to follow it, just to see that it's very, very simple. For example, let's back to the enums. We are going to create the repository error, not internet, and unauthorized. Okay, so we are going to create here, to call a repository that could return an either with, in the left part, it could have that error, that sealed class error, and in the right part, we can have the normal movie, right? So result movie, this is fault is a method from either that receives two functions. In the first function, it will be call it when there is an error, and the second one when there is a success. So it's a very nice way to handle the errors. We don't need to have a try catch, and I think it's a little bit better. And also, we can take profit of the pattern matching. The pattern matching is like in Kotlin, if we have a sealed class and we have a when, and the when is the function is equals to the when, it's going to be eusastic. I don't know if that's the word, but okay, it's going to say that it's an error if you are not handling all the possible values of the when, right? So that's a very, very nice idea to work with, because if we add a new repository error, it's not going to tell in runtime, it's going to tell in a compile time that we are not handling all the possible errors. So that's very, very nice. And she say, okay, tell me more. You are getting me very, very fascinated with that. So, and there is nothing more romantic than Ryan Kotlin just playing a piano. But one thing is how we use cases in Kotlin. This could be the normal use case that we have in Java. Has the params and also only one method, and normally the method is just a facade for repository method, right? This is one method with only one line. So in Kotlin, the functions are the first citizens element, so we can have it without any class that wraps the method. So we can create a lot of, in one file, a lot of use cases a little bit easier, I think, than the Java. We don't need to all that boilerplate that we need to do in Java. At that time, Harrison Ford knows that he has no possibilities with Jacqueline, and also he started to think that he never was in love with her. So he only was in love with one person so long ago, and he said, okay, I'm going to fight for that person. I was in love with her, so I'm going to fight for her. So he switched up and said, okay, I'm going to go with the only person that always supported me. And it was the Princess Leia. Okay, now at that moment, is Ryan Kotlin very, very nice, and he says, okay, we are going to talk about how we execute the use cases that we saw it before. So for example, we can have something like a Fluent API or something like that is wrapping all the use cases, right? For example, in this case, it has the task that we have to execute. We can add it some delay. We can add in UI param that is going to be a math function. It's going to handle the error or the success function. But the most important thing is when we call run, we pass one use case executor. That executor, for example, could be with coroutines in background. So if we call it like show cancellation token, launch, blah, 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 we can run it, the use case, in background. But also we can change the implementation, and we can create another instance of that executor, and we can put it in run blocking. So this this time is not going to block run in background. I mean, it's going to block the thread. So with the just changing the use case executor that we are going to pass it, we can run it on background or we can block the thread. And it could be very, very nice for testing, because in production, it's very interesting to me to run it in background, and in testing, to me, it's very interesting to hold it there until I have the assault, right? So it's going to getting better and better and better. And she said, yes, a lot. What is happening here? Yes, he is proposing her. I know that this doesn't Ryan Codling. This is not Ryan Codling, but I always mix them. So to me are the same people. So I'm going to put it because I think for you also it's the same people, right? And just to finish the talk, I'm going to say that she says yes, because there is only one happiness in life: to love and to be loved. Thank you very much. Just before the questions, I just want to put it the best quotes about the most famous movies. You map, I map, The Mock Dawson and Titanic. Or love means never have to search for a good blame. Love gives story. Or thanks for the adventure and go to have a new one. And Refactor to Goldie, the map movie. Now, yes, if you have any questions, I think there is a link that you can also just put some questions I think the organization created. So that's it. If someone has a question, I'm sorry for my English.
Questions?
No?
No one? Okay,
Okay.
let's
Thank
go
you.
to coffee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicolas.